Hey, what's up, guys? Jake Hamilton here. Just wrapped up an interview with Capone director Josh Trank. Really great guy. His new movie, Capone, hits VOD today if you're watching this on Monday. We also had the chance to talk about a wide variety of things aside from Tom Hardy's incredible performance in the film itself. We talked about his days where he had some trouble when he was directing Fantastic Four, and then the Boba Fett film that he was supposed to direct for Lucasfilm. And we talked about the fact that Boba Fett's now coming back in The Mandalorian. So a wide range of topics, of course, all circling around the VOD release of Capone, which you should absolutely check out. If you don't already, do me a favor, go down, hit that subscribe button, turn in notifications. I'm trying to land as many of these celebrity at-home interviews as we can while we're all social distancing and staying at home. And if you don't already, head on over to Instagram, give me a follow at Jake's Takes. I'm always posting different celebrity pictures and entertainment stories and clips of interviews. So I hope you'll follow me there, and I hope you'll enjoy my interview with director Josh Trank. How are you, dude?
I'm good. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you again. Good to see you. I'm going to jump right into it because I got a lot to talk about. And I know you have a hard out at 3:45, so I'm going to try to get you out on time. But I was talking to you last week about Chicago's perception of Al Capone, and you can't go very far in this city without seeing a picture of him or a tour, or he's on a shot glass or a T-shirt. But it's very much the refined, sort of modern, like successful image of Al Capone, not the image that we get in your film. And it sort of struck me as really interesting that it took this long to get this version of Al Capone, because this is such a fascinating chapter in his story. Why do you think so many filmmakers have avoided this chapter of his life? Because I think it's just as fascinating as his time in Chicago.
Well, I think because if you look at Al Capone's legacy, you look at his life, there are so many stories within his life that would that can easily be turned into like a huge money-making hit. I mean, gangster movies and all kinds of there's so many commercial stories to draw from in Al Capone's legacy. This version of an Al Capone movie, and taking this part of his life and just focusing on that in real time without using flashbacks or anything like that, it's a riskier story to tell. It's one that I think most people wouldn't. I don't think most people would even avoid it. I think most people wouldn't even really think of it as being the right story to tell. I mean, myself, it wasn't, like we discussed before, it wasn't even anything that I had thought about. It only came to me because I was in a certain part of my life where I couldn't stop thinking about Al Capone in a vegetative state in the last year of his life, after many years after being released from Alcatraz. So I had to have a personal meaning in my life to be able to connect to that and desire to tell that story. But I can understand why it wouldn't be the most obvious place to go.
There's so many different interesting moments of this film where, because at this point in his life, Capone is not really connected with reality, and it ends up having these really awesome, almost like Stanley Kubrick, The Shining, like fantasy sequences. And I'm sort of curious, as a filmmaker, when your lead character is not really connected to reality, is that more freeing? Are you then allowed to have sort of a playground of his imagination?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things with Tom is his acting style is about relating to the immediate, and whether or not we're dealing with a situation that is in the context of fantasy or in grounded reality, it's all coming from the same place at the end of the day. But if you've set the stage for any crazy thing that can happen because you've removed the rules of reality from it, you can end up provoking a lot more interesting emotional reactions from somebody like Tom Hardy walking around in that situation. And that's why with Peter Deming, we chose for a style of photographing all of these sequences so that there wasn't a differentiation stylistically between the scenes that take place in quote unquote real life versus the scenes that take place in the fantasy or within his mind, so that stylistically everything looks like it's coming from the same movie, and that way you're getting the same humanity from Tom Hardy regardless of whether or not he's in a perceived reality or in a perceived fantasy.
Speaking of Tom Hardy, because his performance is absolutely unbelievable. When you, as a movie fan, when we hear Tom Hardy's going to play Al Capone, my first thought is like, oh, I can't wait to hear what he does with that performance. And I'm curious, your role as a director, how much you are molding that. Like whenever you see him on set, do you, if you see something you don't like, do you go over there and sort of say like, hey, I don't really like how you're playing it this way? Or do you just sort of sit back and say, look, whatever Tom comes up with, like that's his decision?
It's the first one, the former. I mean, that's what's so cool about Tom, is that there's no ego involved when you're working with him. You know, I can only speak for my own experience with anybody, just like anybody can only speak for their experience with me or with Tom. I have no, you know, I can't speak for anybody except for myself. My experience, like, there was always an accessibility with Tom that if I had any thought, it was a requirement for me to go over and either like say cut, go have a discussion, figure things out. And it never came from a place of there's never like sometimes if and I think anybody can relate to this. Like if you're a film student or if you're making a short film and you're just getting your footing in directing, it's like part of the biggest lesson that you learn is like how to be assertive with your thoughts and how to like go in and tell a talented actor like that they're doing something that you don't want them to do, because it's hard. It goes against sort of like the nature of you know how you want to be with people you respect. You don't want to tell them no, you want to tell them yes. But that's what your job is as the director, is to give direction. So you kind of have to get over the fact that somebody is Tom Hardy or Matt Dillon or Kyle MacLachlan or Linda Cardellini or Noel Fisher or any of these enormously talented actors who you just have nothing but respect for. Like it's a requirement for you to step in and guide the situation and guide the performances in such a way that match to your vision of where you want it to go. And it's doubly on you as the director to be able to convey that in an articulate enough manner so that they understand why it is or it isn't the way that you want it to be.
Since today is Monday, today is the day that reviews drop for the movie, and it's so interesting. Like, and I actually use this as a sign for usually a movie is fascinating is when reviews are completely polar opposite. But it's
right.
So fascinating. Some of the negative reviews actually almost make me. I've told you that I love the movie, so I've already seen it. But they actually making me more interested in seeing the way that some of them are written. Yeah. I'm reading these negative reviews going like, you're selling this movie to me. I'm curious, is like, what is a day? Yeah. What is a day like today? What is it like for you on review day?
It's unexpectedly awesome to see reviews that are, I guess, in a category of like, this is a negative review, but I'm reading the byline and I'm like, that's dope. Like the Richard Roper byline is like incredible. Any of those bylines, you could take those, throw it on a poster, and I don't think anybody would be quite sure whether that. I don't think anybody would know that that was a negative review. It sounds like the kind of movie that you're going to get an intense reaction from. I mean, I'm fine with that. I mean, I haven't seen any reviews that. I would be more disappointed if there was a review that was like. This is like a boring movie and
meh.
And who cares? Yeah, like I fell asleep.
There are no meh reviews, dude.
The negative reviews are like somebody at the edge of their seat with adrenaline, and that's awesome. That's great. I mean, my favorite version of art is art that provokes emotional reaction, and that's why I just keep thinking today about Pink Flamingos and John Waters. Like, you know, we oftentimes as fans of films from history and forget the reception that certain movies got at the time, like movies that were deemed as, you know, like these like nostalgic treasures from the past. Like if you watch Pink Flamingos now, like the content in that movie is quite shocking and disturbing in a way that I'm not making a direct comparison to Capone, because it would be weird for me to make that comparison myself as a filmmaker to somebody who's just an icon like John Waters, which is not what I'm saying. What I'm talking about is just the level of an emotional reaction to a movie that features human behavior and the product of, like, you know, physical degeneration that involves poop and bodily fluids and all kinds of things like that. You know, like, yeah, it's gross, it's uncomfortable. That's not
So
at
what's
all.
life?
I didn't think that people would react to that, like, you know, like sipping their Dr. Pepper and like being like fist pumping. Like,
Yeah.
I assume that people watch that and be pretty, either feel bad for him or feel like revolted or shocked, and it is what it is, you know.
Al Capone listening on the radio to someone else tell the story of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And very few of us are ever in a position where like we have to listen to someone else tell a story about us. But obviously you went through that experience when Fantastic Four came out. I'm just sort of curious, like, what is that like? That moment where you almost lose control of your own narrative and you are almost forced to sit back and listen, like Al Capone did to this in that beautiful scene where he listens to the radio, where you just have to go like someone else is writing my own narrative.
Well, for me, it was, fortunately for me, I still had somewhere to go in my life, because I wasn't plagued by a you know, fatal illness like Al Capone. I think for somebody like Al Capone, what made it interesting cinematically is the fact that he had nowhere to go from there, so he could only listen and be affected by it and deal with it during his last days. For me, I mean, I was still young. I was 31 or 32 when that happened. So I was just sitting there, and my first reaction, my first series of reactions to that over the many months was like, well, what do I do in my life right now that can either like change the narrative or prove to people that I'm not that person? And then after a while, because I knew that if I had just like gotten on the phone and rang up journalists during the middle of that, it would just continue to turn into this like he said, she said thing. And I've always been a great believer in like, let time prove them wrong, you know, like everybody's so wrapped up in today's world of like immediately settling something and that's not how life works. I don't think. I think that sometimes things need to breathe a little bit and for other people to sort of get some perspective. And so after a while, I realized, you know, I'm not dead. I didn't really, you know, like this a caricature of a person who is being related to me is not actually real. And if people want to believe that that's who I am, then that's out of my control. I can just continue to just focus on myself and do healthy and productive things like I would want to be doing, even if they didn't think those things about me. I mean, what a great gift in life, you know, to just sort of like, you know, be the master of your own story, you know, like I'd rather just focus on my own story. Well, I unfortunately still I can't. And it kind of is what it is because, you know, I mean, what drew me to the character is just my love for spaghetti westerns of, you know, Sergio Leone and all of the great themes that Clint Eastwood touched on his filmography after the years that he worked with Sergio Leone, from, you know, from Pale Rider all the way to Unforgiven. So those were all movies and characters and archetypes that that were very personal to me and were a big part of my love for cinema from an early age. And the great thing about the Star Wars universe is that all of the characters in those stories, like from Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, Boba Fett, Darth Vader, these are all archetypes of great characters from the history of cinema, from the swashbucklers and to, you know, the bounty hunters and you know, characters from all of the great epic classic adventure films. So, you know, that's what, you know, and I think it's obvious, like that's where a lot of the filmmakers are drawing their inspiration from, because it's right there in the Star Wars films.
Yeah. Yeah. It's what
So
inspired him.
I'm excited about it. I mean, look, I haven't seen the first season of Mandalorian. I've been focusing on a lot of other stuff, but I'm really excited to eventually just like sit down and watch it and become a fan again, because it's been a long time.
You know, I'd imagine when you're crafting someone like Capone, you know, you don't have a lot of videos to like model, you know,
Right.
your perception after. You don't have audio, but you have like facts and you have like kind of fun information that you can kind of learn. Was there, and what the cool thing, if you know, if I know you haven't been to Chicago a while, if you come back around Chicago, every corner of the city has some sort of Al Capone fact. Yeah, no worries. So I guess what is the fact or the piece of information, maybe one single piece of information about Al Capone that told you a lot, that maybe you were able to take that and run with it?
Well, something about him that I thought was really fascinating is that he never wrote anything down, ever.
Was there a reason for that?
Yeah, he had apparently a photographic memory and just an incredible database in his own head that he was able to store a lot of information. And if you think about it, Al Capone was running the equivalent of a massive corporation, and one that required a really, really complicated amount of secrecy. So he knew that there were, you know, he couldn't trust anybody to a certain degree. So he never wrote anything down, never told anybody the most important details of what he had to know. I mean, kind of sounds a little bit like Trump, but I think Capone probably was a little smarter than that, probably a lot smarter than that. So I wouldn't lean too heavily on that comparison, but that was something that really struck me, because by the time he ended up in the position that he was in at the end of his life during those last few years, all he was left with were those facts and those numbers and those places and those memos that he had stored away in his brain that he had never shared with anybody for very specific reasons. So I touched on that in the movie in more ways than one.